you will see hundreds and hundreds of people at different locations, on this campus, the Laurier campus, in the city, talking about a number of things. But the key theme that these delegates this year came here to discuss is basically, what role does scholarship play in an uncertain world? And what do we exactly mean by this uncertain world? We quite often say that it's a very complex world out there. It is becoming more and more complex because of a number of things. And what are they? The population increase, of course, the demand for resources, be it food, water, energy, anything you can think of, and of course, massification of higher education, that more and more and more people want to receive quality higher education, or simply education. And what would these mean to the environment? What would these mean to our economy? And when you put all these together, it does become quite complex. And how do we deal with this? Do we just say that, well, it is complex and let it somehow resolve itself, or really create forums such as this one so that we can really, in detail, address these questions? But in my mind, after all, it is the humanities that help us make sense of this complex, changing world. That is why, again, I'm so delighted that we are having these big thinking lectures here to answer at least part of these questions, to bring some meaning, some context around these questions. This is exactly this active exploration is something we embrace at the University of Waterloo, where students are really encouraged not only to ask questions, but participate in finding the answers and then question the answers as well. This is the kind of thinking process, the thought process that will help us to cope with and successfully live within this changing, complex world. As we consider these complex times and their impact upon us, remember that critical inquiry is what creates profound learning. And that is what, again, we strive for here at the University of Waterloo, and I believe that all other universities are doing the same thing. We want our students to be more than employer ready. We want them to become effective citizens of the world. So I hope that you will enjoy today's lecture and carry the spirit of engagement with you throughout the Congress and beyond. And again, I'm so delighted that Professor Eberts is here with us today, and we look forward to her very interesting and engaging lecture.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Dr. Hamdullahpur, for your kind welcome to all of us. I am Melinda Smith, the former Vice President, Equity and Diversity Issues for the Canadian Federation for the Humanities and Social Sciences. Before we get started, I want to note that there is a simultaneous translation being provided for this lecture, thanks to our host university, Wilfrid Laurier University, and the University of Waterloo. You can pick up your headsets in the lobby if you have not already done so. I'd also like to thank our partners at the Association for Universities and Colleges of Canada for making community participation possible at this year's Big Thinking events, and the Canadian Foundation for Innovation for sponsoring the speaker series. Each year at Congress, the Equity and Diversity Portfolio develops a series of panels and lectures focusing on equity issues both within the Academy and the broader Canadian society. This year is no exception. We have an impressive lineup of intellectuals from across the country gathering to connect issues of equity and diversity with Congress delegates across the disciplines in the social sciences and humanities and the wider Academy. We are especially delighted that the Big Thinking lecture brings us Mary Ebert. Dr. Eberts has long been involved in equity, diversity, and social justice work. A co-founder of the Women's Legal Education and Action Fund, Dr. Eberts was involved in crafting equality guarantees in the Charter, Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which marks its 30th anniversary this year. Recognition of her important legal contribution has come through the Governor General's Award in commemoration of the person's case, the Law Society of Upper Canada Gold Medal, and several honorary degrees. Please join me in welcoming Mary Eberts.
Thank you very much. The topic of my speech today has its origins in an experience of mine almost 30 years ago in 1974. I was a new member of faculty at the University of Toronto Faculty of Law, appointed July 1. There was a faculty meeting on July 8th, and I told the dean that I wouldn't be able to make it because I was going to be working in the federal election on July the 8th, which was election day. This caused great consternation. They didn't know what to do about someone with those proclivities to work in an election. I seem to remember being told that no one had ever given election day involvement as a reason for missing a faculty meeting. Remember, it was 1974. They also really had a hard time figuring out whether I should be asked to attend the meetings of the Faculty of Law Wives. That experience of Election Day in 1974 has stuck with me over the years. In retrospect, I see it as just the first, but quite an early sign that I was not cut out for faculty life. That proved to be the case. I left U of T to join a large Bay Street law firm in 1980, 6 years and 1 maternity leave after I had joined. The reason I stayed 6 years was because I was on the Faculty Association bargaining team that got the maternity leave in the first place. 18 weeks of paid maternity leave, and then I turned out to be the first one to take it. And I didn't want to be, the occasion of members of the university administration saying, oh, those women, they just take maternity leave and then they take off. So I stayed for another year after I went back from my maternity leave, and then I gave my notice and I worked for another year. So there we are. After being unhappy for 6 years in a so-called collegial environment, I was struck by how much real collegiality I found on Bay Street, where we were united in the common purpose of serving the clients and often worked together very well to fulfill that goal. Oh, and in the context of unhappiness, did I mention that I was the only full-time woman faculty member and put on 2 big committees, admissions and curriculum, in my first year there, just to ensure that they had female representation? Sound familiar? As well as being obliged to organize a conference and edit the conference proceedings as the junior and only woman member of a cadre of 4 teachers in the area of family law, which I had not wanted to teach in the first place. Well, I have never given up my dream of actually being a scholar and helping through scholarship to make a better world. Over the years, I have been a fellow traveler of the Academy, teaching courses in charter litigation, legal ethics, judging, and human rights being the most recent one, and holding 2 chairs in human rights. My recent foray back to academic life as the Ariel F. Sallows Chair in Human Rights at the University of Saskatchewan has given me the opportunity to revisit and reassess the potential for academic life and work to contribute to the fashioning of a better world. And I must say, in somewhat more secure and pleasant circumstances than my original foray into academic life. I have a well-endowed chair started by an incredibly altruistic Saskatchewan lawyer, a small faculty, close-knit, in a province with an excellent record of social justice initiatives and leadership. The added benefit of the vibrant Native Law Centre, started by visionary law dean Roger Carter, and a leader in preparing Aboriginal students for careers in law, as well as the site of the distinguished scholarship of Sallows Henderson and leadership and advocacy of Ruth Thompson, as well as an award-winning clinic, Classic, capably led by Sarah Buehler and Amanda Dodge, and supported by faculty and the local bar. Not to mention my own seniority at the bar and whatever security of place that might impart. Yes, in many ways, this experience at U of S, like the rehearsal for it at University of Ottawa in 2004 and 5, makes me ideally situated to explore the potential of university life as a locus for social change and improvement through appreciation of the knowledge, skills, and ideals of those who are in the professoriate. What I have found, though, are major systemic factors, possibly now much worse than when I first ventured into academic life, that make it more and more difficult to act as a citizen and play a citizen's role in civic life from the vantage point of an academic. I am not saying it is impossible. Indeed, I have experienced or observed many instances of this type of activity over the past year or so. Just let me give you a few examples. I worked with colleagues inside and outside the university to protest the BC government's refusal to fund interveners at the Wally Opal inquiry into police response to early complaints about Robert Picton's depredations. They just let him go again after somebody complained and he killed a few more women. I worked with 2 University of Saskatchewan law colleagues to draw attention to the serious violations of human rights norms in the recent restructuring of the Saskatchewan Human Rights Commission, this in the local press and through alliances with community organizations. Most recently, I signed on to a letter protesting the use of the federal budget to repeal or weaken significant environmental laws after a most respected senior colleague told us that this was the worst assault on environmental protection in her 30 years of experience. And I signed on to a letter from various civil society organizations protesting Canada's disrespect of the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to food, Oliver De Schutter. And these instances of civic behavior in my little corner of the world don't exhaust the field. There was a professor's letter against the prorogation of Parliament, January 11th, 2010. Law professors and MPs did a brief to have Omer Cotter considered as a child soldier, January 18th, 2008. And of course, we have the organization by the CAUT of protests against the discontinuation of Statistics Canada's full-time university and college academic staff survey after 40 years, and to protest the cuts at Library and Archives Canada. These activities come within what I would describe as citizenship. And let me just go into that definition a little bit further. The meaning of the term citizen in this context isn't self-evident. It might include being part of civil society, being active in civil society, that third sector distinct from government and business that has now been cemented into the organization of our world. I was interested to learn, for example, that the UN has a website recognizing civil society organizations and calling them indispensable partners for UN activities at a country level. And the UK Cabinet Office has an office for civil society. Dare I say that if our cabinet had an office for civil society, it would probably be somewhere near Waco, the pest exterminators? Civil society Civil societies also have their own acronyms now, CSOs. And they're called intermediary organizations, which give voice to various sectors of society and enrich public participation in democracies. Participation in civil society has been a way that academics have sought to better their world. I can't think of a better example of this than the National Action Committee on the Status of Women. 4 of the presidents of the National Action Committee on the Status of Women were full-time academics: Lorna Marsden, Haviva Hoshek, Lynn MacDonald, and Sonera Tobani. The first 3 of these women actually then went into politics. Lorna Marsden as an appointed senator, Haviva Hoshek as Minister of Housing in Ontario and later a member of Jean Chrétien's staff, and Lynn MacDonald as an NDP member of Parliament. Now we are in an uncivil society in which the National Action Committee on the Status of Women has essentially been killed by government withdrawal of funding. So yes, participation in civil society is a way for academics to try to work to improve our society. But be careful, because civil society itself is an endangered species. In addition to participation in civil society, we might have a more ad hoc definition of citizenship, or behaving like a citizen in the academic context. And I've searched for a definition of that kind of citizen activism that I could share with you, and actually found one in the material of something called the Citizenship Foundation, a United Kingdom charity started in 1989 with substantial support from the legal profession, which does support and which does citizenship education for young people in the UK. The Citizenship Foundation considers, here's what they say on their website. They want a fair, inclusive, and cohesive society. They want a democracy in which people have the knowledge, skills, and confidence to take part and drive change as effective citizens, both as individuals and as communities. What is citizenship? It is about ensuring that everyone has the knowledge and skills to understand, engage with, and challenge the main pillars of our democratic society: politics, the economy, and law. And this foundation champions civic participation. That's quite a good summary of what I mean by academic people working as citizens. It's burnishing all of those values, and through our skills and our knowledge and the vitality of our commitment to participatory democracy, inspiring and helping others to step up and themselves play a role in this kind of civic participation that will inspire a better society. I also found in my searches for a good definition of citizenship what I will call a cautionary tale. It is on a website called www.technologystudent.com, and this is a list of the characteristics of a good citizen. Respects others and their property, is helpful and considerate and willing to put others first, listens to the views of others and thinks about what they have to say, works hard, is well-mannered and pleasant, and is always willing to learn. Now, I think that sometimes in the concept of the modern state and the concept of the modern university, we have a little battle going on here between the definition of citizenship fostered by the Citizenship Foundation and the definition of a good citizen propounded by technologystudent.com. And I'll come back to that later. So what I'm primarily interested in for purposes of this talk is citizenship in the sense used by the Citizenship Foundation. And I want to state here that there's a crucial difference between citizenship in that sense and the ability to be a citizen in that sense from a base in the professoriate, and power. A difference and an important relationship as well. There is a direct relationship between power inside and outside the university system and the ability for people in the system to be a citizen in the sense that I use the term. And as an illustration of this power thing, let me go back to 1974 and the July 8th election, when my faculty found it so unusual, so outré, that one of its members wanted to take time off to work in a federal election. One of the parties contending in that election was the Liberals, led by Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who himself had been an associate professor at the Université de Montréal in 1961 to 1965. His cabinet was crammed with academics. Two former law deans, Mark McGuigan from the University of Windsor and Otto Lang from the University of Saskatchewan. Mark McGuigan had 2 PhDs, and the people in the cabinet office used to call him Dr. McGuigan. He had Lloyd Axworthy with his PhD from Princeton, who had taught at the University of Manitoba and the University of Winnipeg, and Monique Bégin with a PhD in sociology from the Sorbonne. Both Dr. Axworthy and Dr. Bégin returned to academic life after politics. Other actors on our political stage of that era have academic roots. Ed Broadbent with his PhD in political science from U of T. Ron Atke, also, he was a law professor at the University of Western Ontario. And David Crombie, a professor at Ryerson, who, like Jack Layton, another Ryerson professor, switched first to Toronto municipal politics, then federal. In Quebec, Claude Morin, Laval professor from 1956 to 1963, was an advisor to Premier Lesage after 1960 and one of the primary thinkers behind the Quiet Revolution. This participation of academics in official, formal political life in Canada is not limited to the glory days of the 60s and 70s. There still is a fascination in politics for the academic, and we have many current practitioners. Erwin Cutler, professor of law at McGill, former cabinet minister in the Liberal government, now an MP. Michael Ignatieff, whose transformation from academic to politician was, the cause célèbre of the past 10 years of Canadian politics. John McCallum, with a PhD in economics, who was the Dean of Arts at McGill before becoming the chief economist at the Royal Bank of Canada and is now a Liberal backbencher. And on the Conservative side, Ted Morton, U of C political science professor and Reform Party senator in waiting, Tom Flanagan and Ian Brodie, other PhDs active at the University of Calgary. And Mr. Brodie became chief of staff for Mr. Harper in the PMO in 2006. And most recently, Craig Scott, a professor from Osgoode Hall Law School who took Broadview Danforth for the NDP, Jack Layton's old seat, and Kelly Leach, who has a degree from the Ivy School of Business as well as being an orthopedic surgeon, and is an associate professor of surgery and sits for the Conservatives. Appointed politicians or political actors are also from academic life. Noel Kinsella, who was prof at St. Thomas U for 41 years, is now the Speaker of the Senate, having been a Mulroney appointment in 1990. And of course, you heard from David Johnson, our present Governor General. And his office actually was next door to mine in 1974. And I think he probably understood why I wanted to work in the election. This relatively long list is to make a small but essential point. These academics took their citizenship to its logical conclusion of running for and securing office so that they could put their ideas into practice. so that they would have the power to get their ideas into practice. The closeness between power and the ability to participate in political life in one form or another is significant here. Take Ian Brodie. His academic work included something, a publication called Friends of the Court Party, in which he was highly critical of interveners in charter litigation. And one of the things that took place during his stay in the Prime Minister's office was the abolition of funding to the Court Challenges program, which supplied the funding for a lot of those very interveners that he had criticized so roundly in his academic work. Even the examples that I have given of my recent exercise of citizenship within the university depend on my being a person of relative power and status within that system. My name and title are sought out and are things that others will respond to. But what of those within the university system who have no or relatively little power? Are they able to exercise their citizenship in the way that the Citizenship Foundation from the UK contemplates being done? No. My answer is a resounding no. Universities purport to be bastions of freedom of speech. The president of the University of California, Mark Yudof, said, free speech is in the DNA of the University of California on November 16th last year, the day after the demonstrations in Berkeley Sprout Plaza. And then this year, in a statement on the release of the Reynoso report about the pepper spraying of seated students in a nonviolent protest at UC Davis, he said, free speech, including nonviolent protest, is part of the DNA of this university, and it must be protected with vigilance. Well, how does Dr. Yudof recommend that this precious DNA be protected? Check out an article by Mark Levine on Al Jazeera English in May 2012, in which he points out that Dr. Yudof's mass email before May Day this year recommended that members of the University of California community should, as a precaution, avoid all demonstrations. They should avoid cities with a large immigrant population and strong labor groups. They should dress conservatively, maintain a low profile by avoiding demonstration areas and discussions of the issues at hand. So much for the DNA. Yudof is essentially recommending that university members be good citizens, like that technology student definition of good citizens. Indeed, what choice do many in the university have, especially those who are in the beginning stages of their careers? A cadre that will include women and members of racialized minorities and Indigenous peoples in disproportionate numbers. In the modern university, what is paramount? Let me borrow an expression from the United States, which I find so interesting: de-investment, the retirement or withdrawal of funds from the operating budgets of universities by public authorities. This means that there is more need to get other sources of funding from the corporate sector or from government, but special purpose funding provided by government, like SSHRC, CRCs, publication grants, and all of that other earmarked funding with very difficult application processes. And as the amount of funding assigned to general purposes is withdrawn and the specialized funding is ramped up or even left the same, we see greater and greater barriers to university professors, especially those in the early stages of their careers, acting as citizens. There are two effects. The withdrawal of the funding means the universities are seeking to conserve resources and make them go further. They'll increase their reliance on non-tenure stream teachers, those outside the wage and benefit protections of the modern collective agreement. Those staff are highly vulnerable. No job security, overburdened with teaching. They can't do scholarship on their schedule and in their living and working conditions, let alone acts of citizenship, because of the terrible time crunch that they're in. And if they do citizenship and it irritates people, they can be made to vanish without a trace. As Jim Turk pointed out in a Maclean's article in January 2011, you don't have to discipline these people to get rid of them. You don't have to fire them. They're just not hired again. Who are these people? The data indicate that women are substantially represented in this group. The CAUT Equity Review, September 2008, said of the period 1985 to 2005, in this period, the number of non-tenure track appointments grew by 11.8%, and females accounted for the majority of increase in this category. Women made up 44.8% of non-tenured faculty in 2005. By 2005, women still made up just 28% of all tenured university teachers, but nearly 45% of non-tenure track positions. The Faculty Association at the University of Calgary, in its Fair Employment Week edition in October 2011, has further unhappy statistics. Sessional academics, they report, compose nearly a quarter of all academics at the university. That is an amount almost equal to the number of associate professors. 1/2 of the sessionals at U of C at that time are women. Contrast to the statistics for ongoing academics, and they point out that for ongoing academics, 64% are men and 36% are women. For sessionals, 44% are men and 56% are women. This is a problem not only for those aspiring to professional life in the academy, but also for students at these institutions. CAUT is reported as saying that between 40 and 60% of undergraduate teaching is done by sessionals. These students are paying tuition, which is rising in cost every year, and their teachers are not treated with respect by the system in which they teach and the system which puts those teachers in front of those classrooms. If one wants to get out of sessional lecturer hell, it's necessary to plan carefully, even before the completion of the doctoral degree. As much as the substantive knowledge in one's field and the procedural knowledge about research methods and so on, the modern academic must develop heightened proficiency in the arts of the managed funding environment. And that's what I call the modern university, the managed funding environment. The Blue Ribbon panel advising the SSHRC said in its 2008 report that research grant program officers belong to an emerging new profession. Well, yes, they do, because there are so many things that cannot be done in the university now unless a research grant is applied for, that there is a whole new profession growing up to deal with that. And on the professor's end of things, the profession must change accordingly. People must learn to survive in the managed funding environment, where how to apply successfully for funding is the most essential survival skill of all. And we must learn that early. What does this do? Well, doing a master's and to a greater extent a doctorate is a course of instruction in how to learn to care deeply about what other people think of your work. It is a course of instruction on how to respond to the criticisms, suggestions, and requests of senior scholars. It is a course of instruction on how to survive in the gerontocracy. That was there anyway. That was there anyway before the university became a managed funding environment. Peer review was an inevitable, and many would argue necessary part of academic life. But the occasions when the young, the less experienced, those who want or need something in order to progress in their careers must submit to the judgment of their peers. And notice, it's not lateral peerdom here. It's up there. The peers are up there, and they're not peers at all. They're supervisors. They're regulators. They're seniors. These occasions have proliferated in the managed funding environment, not just at the 3-year review and in the tenure process itself, and later at the time when you're applying for promotion, but each time one needs to seek funding, and these days one is always needing to seek funding. Just consider, once again, as we did in the case of the sessionals, the time cost of a culture in which elaborate applications must be submitted at every turn. Not only must one meet the requirements for scholarship, doing the work, but one must meet the requirements for funding the work, doubling the workload at least. Whatever the time burden of making applications to fund the work, it has to come out of something. And it's highly likely that the time cost imposed on the younger scholar is going to come from time which might otherwise be spent in community or family activities. And if there is a family responsibility, I think it's almost certain that is the community responsibilities or community activities which will drop. They'll go first, especially if you are, like many women, the primary caregiver of the child. Not just the time cost, but also the risk of nonconformity is increased as the occasions of compulsory evaluation proliferate. Typically, applications for funding to outside sources must pass through the university or even departmental machinery first, and only if they pass muster there will they go on to the outside stage. The SSHRC, for example, in the case of doctoral candidates, the review that was done by the Blue Ribbon panel reported in 2008 that of all of the applications by doctoral candidates that were submitted to their universities to be passed on to the SSHRC, only 40% of the applications made it through the gate. 60% left on the cutting room floor. And consider Canada Research Chairs. In the case of the Canada Research Chair, not only is there an elaborate internal process, but there is substantial corporate investment in any application that goes forward because of the requirement that the candidate's work fit in with the university's strategic research plan. The university itself is going to be judged and will not want to put itself in bad company when that happens. And so at every stage, the likelihood is that the candidate will be assessed on the basis of who will be the least objectionable to the most people. That is the new standard. Who will be the least objectionable to the most people? And this construction of a tightly woven set of hoops was criticized by the Blue Ribbon panel advising the SSHRC in December of 2008. It recommended that the university screening stage for the doctoral fellowships program be eliminated. They cited the very slim success rate at getting through this steel ribbon around the internal process and said that they seriously question the practice. So You've got the time cost issue, and you've got this least objectionable to the most number of people issue. They both bump up against citizenship and your ability to be a citizen within the university. Let me tell you one little story I was told by a doctoral candidate at an Ontario university who is an Ojibwe woman. She was told by her community that they would share their knowledge with her for purposes of her doctoral thesis in exchange for her doing things for them. It was a reciprocal arrangement. There is a time cost in such reciprocal arrangements, and there is also a potential risk cost in those arrangements, because people who have such reciprocal relationships may be asked by the community that is providing the research material for their doctorate to take a stand within the university about something. And that stand might be unpopular. And then the person who takes that stand will not be the person who is the least objectionable to the most number of people. It is only people with no such reciprocal relationships in their scholarship who will be able to pass the least objectionable to the most number of people test. And those are the people who fit in with the existing model of the university. Well, I think we're really at give our heads a shake time here. We have, you know, some serious things to think about. And the Blue Ribbon panel from the review of the SSHRC was really perceptive about this. They talked about the fact that proposals to the SSHRC under the old system, proposals coming from new faculty, didn't fare very well. They looked at 29 committees assessing these applications in 2008-2009, or for that academic year, and they found that only 23% of the applications from new scholars were successful, but 40% of the applications from regular scholars, that is, those with more than 5 years, were successful. And what the Blue Ribbon panel said is that that kind of discrepancy cannot be fixed by tinkering with the process by which the grants are evaluated. The SSHRC has to make a deliberate decision that it is important and necessary for there to be funding for new researchers and change its systems accordingly. So you might have to change the criteria, add in some criteria, change the process, whatever, but you can't do it by tinkering with the existing peer review system. And their recommendation 30 was state a clear policy goals regarding younger researchers, eventually setting target success rates and defining mechanisms to fund new scholar applications following positive merit application. So I think they're pointing the way to some of the things that we need to look at in evaluating the present university system. One of them being, okay, we can't fix this by just changing the peer review. We have to look at what are our goals and objectives. How are we going to ensure that the university system is still alive and well and producing high quality research 5, 10, and 15 years down the road? Which brings me to the Canada Research Chairs. I know that's a favorite topic with some of you here. I was struck by the fact that the chairs are allocated, like universities get chairs, on the basis of the portion of the granting agency's funding that each eligible institution has received. So the 3 granting agencies, they figure out how much they gave away all told, how much each university got, and then success breeds success. You get the number of Canada Research Chairs allocated to you depending on how much of the other research money that you got. Success breeding success. So who's going to change a winning formula? Nobody's going to change a winning formula. Those universities that got lots of research grants before and thus are getting more Canada Research Chairs are not going to change what they do. And maybe that is one of the reasons why in the Canada Research Chair statistics for March 2012, we see that there are only 141 Tier 1 chairs held by women, 669 chairs and Tier 1 held by men. In Tier 2, 325 chairs are held by women, and men hold 678 chairs. These statistics are very disproportionate to the number of women who are in the university system now, which is riding at somewhere near 40%, if not more by now. But what has happened here is that the universities are going farther and farther and farther down this particular rabbit hole. If it works to get us money from the major granting agencies, we'll just keep doing more of the same, which is giving preference to the people who are well-versed and very well able to deal with the managed funding environment. That is, the people who are not held up by the time cost of all those applications. That is, people who have no obligations to their communities, no obligations to their families, and people who are the least unobjectionable to the most number of people. And given that the people who are deciding whether someone is objectionable are old white men, then guess who is the least objectionable to the most of them? You know, well, go figure. So, I think we have to do a collective act of citizenship on a serious scale here. I'm going to go back for a minute to one of the activities that I talked about earlier. The CAUT is seriously questioning the decision of the Government of Canada with respect to Libraries and Archives Canada. That's where we keep our research material, our raw material, the raw material for our work and our national history. It is also challenging the decision of Statistics Canada, a government agency, not to keep the kinds of statistics that allow us to know when women and minorities are getting the shaft and when they're not. They don't keep those statistics anymore. I guess that means we aren't getting the shaft anymore. Okay, so what we have here is, in the university system, a house full of lights with one extension cord and one plug. And that extension cord could be pulled out of that plug at any time. Look where all the funding comes from. The 3 granting agencies and the Canada Research Chairs. They all came, it all comes from the same government that is cutting back Library and Archives Canada and cutting back on the Statistics Canada survey of university faculty and doing a whole number of other things that senior academics can exercise the privilege of tenure and the privilege of their power in the academy to draw to people's attention, like running all this anti-environmental legislation through the budget process, unheard of. So, the people in the universities, the people who are managing the financial environment of the universities are saying, we trust those people in Ottawa. We are going to let them be our only extension cord, and we are going to let them be our only plug. And maybe they could pull it any time, but we have faith they won't. We have faith they won't. Well, I think that blue ribbon panel had the right idea. We have to look at policy decisions here. We have to stop tinkering. We have to look for the university sector to start resisting the financial pressures that are put on it, instead of just succumbing to the requirement that we have only one extension cord and one plug. How do we do that? How do we do that? Well, my first point is, are we even asking ourselves this question? Are we even asking ourselves, do we want to be in a system where all the funding comes from the people who are closing down Library and Archives Canada? I think we should ask ourselves that question. And my second point is, everybody may have a slightly different answer. There are people who want to stay in the university system. There are people who are invested in getting their degrees or having got their degrees and who want to teach and who want to do scholarship in the university system. Well, I say to those people, okay, it's time for you to get your hands on the pump. It's time to be a citizen within the university system and say, enough already with this. Enough already with all of this evaluation, with all of this sort of gerontocracy, with all of this peer review that's actually just, are you good enough for the old men who run us? My other possibility here is there are many of us who should just leave the university system. I'm not saying that this will make more room for those who stay behind, because if a lot of people leave, they'll just cut the budget again and say, oh, well, we got rid of those nuisance deadbeats, so now we can cut the budget, and they're not wasting our money anymore. We need seriously to think as academic people, wanting to be citizens, wanting to increase civic participation, wanting to increase the amount of justice and freedom and fairness in our society. We need to ask whether we should be trying to do that in the university system, and we should be looking for other ways of creating institutions that have authority, that will be listened to, where we can speak about what we know and where we can bring to bear what we know on the pressing problems of the age. I think that one of the places to do that is increasingly in alliance with members of civil society. We need to be leaving the academy, even if we're still on the payroll. We need to be leaving the academy and going to where people live, going to where people work, and going to where people are considering how they're going to make ends meet and what the decisions of this government and these governments around the world and these major economic actors mean to them. We need to go there and we need to talk. And we need to find ways of giving in ordinary citizens' eyes the knowledge we have, the authority that will make them listen to us and share with us the job of citizenry that they have undertaken to perform. Thank you. I think I just hit some screen.
Thank you. This session is scheduled to end in about 5 minutes. Do we have time for questions? So maybe we can take one question if there is someone who's has a burning desire to make a very short comment or question. Brent? Burning desire.
Thanks very much. Is this on?
No, it's not on.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Eberts, for the presentation. My name is Brent Herbert Copley. I'm the Vice President for Research Capacity at SSHRC, and I wanted to tell you how much we... how much we welcome the opportunity to debate our programs. I was personally thrilled to hear you refer to the Blue Ribbon Panel. If nothing else, that does prove that people can negotiate our website to find critical documents. And I think that, that's a landmark report for us. I want to draw people's attention, though, to the fact that since 2008, there has been really a fundamental shift in the nature of SSHRC's program, inspired in part by the Blue Ribbon Panel report. And the hallmark of that really has been to try to ensure that the SSHRC's programs are as flexible as possible to reflect the full range of scholarship that's happening in the academy and with partners in other sectors, to ensure that the nature of our programs and the nature of our review processes reflect that. There's not time to go into everything that you've talked about, but one I would draw people's attention to is the issue of new scholars, where we agree that simply tinkering with that is not sufficient. What now exists at SSHRC is a program of insight development grants where we guarantee that the success rates for new and established scholars will be at least equivalent. So there has been progress. I would urge people who want to hear more about some of this to visit the SSHRC booth, talk to some of our wonderful program officers about the changes that are taking place. Thank you.
Well, on that note, and if there are no, please come to the.
Thank you very much for such an illuminating and very deeply rooted explanation to us. My name is Ariel F, and I'm from the Canadian Peace Research Association. And we are having our conference starting on Thursday within the bigger one. The keynote, the topic. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's on. It's just
Thank you, yes.
Okay.
The keynote speech will be whether peace research is under siege in Canada. And this comes from an authority who is a very eminent peace researcher. And there is a lot of evidence to indicate that it is under siege. It seems to me it's a vital part of Canada's system that there should be integrity. And it's so critical to protect that integrity, but so often that is not the case. I want to thank you very much, and you might have a few comments to make further to this. Thank you so much.
I think your observations really are an example of what I was talking about, and that is for people who are concerned about issues to work across the boundaries of the academy, as your association does with your various alliances, and also to keep an eye on what's happening with the funding. I mean, there is one extension cord and one plug, and you don't want pulling that one plug to pull the funding from peace research. And if the people who have their hands on the extension cord don't like peace, well, then we've got problems.
Okay, well, on that note, I want to thank Mary for joining us, and for you all for joining us here today. I think Mary offered a powerful and evocative call to those of us who are professors in the academy, to administrators, to the granting council, about the challenge of citizenship and engagement. I mean, university and community engagement are part and parcel of what I think are the major calls today. And so she points out, I think, quite powerfully the paradoxes of what it means to be a good citizen, whether in your community or in formal politics, and at the same time, the potential chill of sticking your neck out and speaking truth to power in terms of your advancing in the academy. So there is a paradox, the call for more engagement, and at the same time, the risk of those engagement, if the principle that's governing it is that we need to be least objectionable to most people. That means most of us will be ruled out, I think. So, and that's not what we want. We want the people who are informed and engaged to be participating and to be exercising their citizenship in the fullest. I think that's what these the equity and diversity sessions are about, and I want to thank Mary for offering just the most amazing range of possibilities and for challenging us to continue with our kind of citizenship and engagement in the fullest sense possible. Please join me in thanking you.